So I'm recording this on September 29th, so almost 3 weeks out since the murder of Charlie Kirk. Um, and what I'm going to get into today is in line with the title of this channel, which is A Perfect Venn Diagram. Now, it's far from a perfect title, but what I'm trying to get at is that the only way I see forward for American politics, American culture, is if we start looking for the perfect Venn diagram, which would be the perfect blend of various truths, but also various qualities that would lead us forward. And so when Charlie Kirk was killed, like most other people, I thought, I've heard that name, but I don't know who that person really was. It's the world we live in now where somebody can be wildly popular and at the same time really not be known by the majority of people. So, as the days went on, I looked into, some of the videos, some of the compilations of the various things that he said. And, it was pretty much what I thought he was, just at a distance. You know, Personally, I would say somebody who supports Trump that much, works hand in glove with the White House, tells me basically all I need to know. But of course, there's always more to know. There's always more nuance. And so I watched, several videos, and got a flavor for the things he said. Now, I am a lifelong Democrat, but I'm also one of those that might call themselves an independent, though I have a hard time with, people who claim, to be independent because that can be a form of intellectual laziness, right? Independents don't get anything done. One or the other party, one or the other organization gets things done. So it's easy to call oneself an independent. But, the majority of my life voted pretty strictly Democratic, though in this last election, what I did, I live in Southern California, was I voted Democrat for president, vice president, senator, and then everything down ballot from there, I actually voted straight Republican. Like I didn't even look at the candidate names. I just voted Republican because I wanted to protest. There was no chance that any of the Republicans were going to win. So the point wasn't really voting for Republicans so much as telling the Democrats that I wasn't happy. Again, what I'm trying to get at in this channel is that there really is this perfect Venn diagram out there somewhere that is a blend of certain truths that are immutable, but also then taken by people that have the heart to do the right thing with those truths. And so the title of this particular video is something along the lines of agreeing with Charlie Kirk, somebody who I would have more disagreements with than agreements. But if we're going to make our way forward, I believe that we have to first come to terms with truth in and of itself. Like Ben Shapiro is famous for saying, facts don't care about your feelings. And so when I was watching some of Charlie Kirk's clips, and these would be, things put together by people who didn't like Charlie Kirk, people who were saying, and I agree, that we need to renounce political violence. There's absolutely no way forward for us if we settle our political differences violently. But at the same time, we can't just whitewash what Charlie Kirk was, what he stood for, the things that he said. And as it relates to political violence, there were some really disturbing things that he said and did. He called for the man who attacked Paul Pelosi in his home with a hammer and fractured his skull. he called for his listeners, his supporters, to bail that man out of jail. On January 6th, he was instrumental in getting, 1,000, 2,000 people to the mall to riot on that day. And though he, you know, gave plausible deniability and said, well, I shipped, students to the mall, but none of them rioted, that just doesn't pass muster. Like everybody who was involved with January 6th knew that there was going to be a riot and knew that that was going to result in violence. And at the very least, we're partaking in the big lie and trying to thwart the will of the American people, which had been settled as it should be in a fair and free election. So, any of these criticisms that are lobbed towards the left that say, we weren't, taking the situation with the sort of gravity and respect that it deserved, and that our words were inflammatory and responsible for the violence on that day. None of those criticisms can be aimed at the left that then can't easily be turned around and aimed at Charlie Kirk. But the point of this video is to take it a step further and say, okay, it's easy to disagree with Charlie Kirk. The more difficult task would be to look at some of the things that he said, some of the things that were most controversial, and say and admit, or at least point to the deeper reality that supported what he said. So, thinking of his inflammatory remarks around Michelle Obama and Ketanji Brown Jackson. And there was a third Black woman that he rolled up into that particular comment. But, in one of the pieces, he says that Michelle Obama and Ketanji Brown Jackson don't have the mental processing power to do their jobs, and that they only stole those jobs from a white person, because of DEI and, just general wokeness. I think that he is wrong in the breadth of that statement. I don't think that Michelle Obama and I don't think that Ketanji Brown Jackson are lacking in processing power. But there is a deeper truth at the heart of that, which the left denies and which the right has taken as established scientific fact. When I started with YouTube Prime in 2020, it sort of revolutionized the way that I consume media, because as soon as I didn't have to sit through a commercial every 30 seconds, I was free to really, marinate in hours upon hours of free content. And one of the truths that is out there on, the major podcasts, Joe Rogan, Lex Friedman, among others. An issue that I thought Sam Harris was actually very brave in his stance on was the very well-established and robust scientific finding that there is a difference among races in terms of IQ, and that there's a very significant difference among races in IQ. And that this has been studied thoroughly in one way or another for over a century. And all the data points to there being a significant gap in the IQ of races. White people having roughly 100 IQ on average, and Black Americans having roughly an IQ of 85 on average. And so when I'm trying to put together, make an argument for some perfect Venn diagram, if that is true, that has to be a part of that Venn diagram. Now, that's not enough. There's more than just, hardcore facts that are important when putting together the Venn diagram. There also has to be the level, the depth of character. There has to be a good heart at the center of that so that one can then use those facts in the correct way. And so a criticism that I would have of Charlie Kirk is that he doesn't or didn't have that depth of character. That it's easy to talk about the hardcore truths, things that are true objectively. It's easy to talk about those to an audience that's eager to hear it, right? If the reason that they want to hear it and the reason that you're saying it isn't because, hey, here's a fact that's been established by decades of study by people who, it just makes no sense for them to throw away their careers to lie on a subject like this. I think Sam Harris really had a great point when he said that, for these academics, for these psychologists that study intelligence, for them to devote their entire career to get all the way up to a PhD level and then to go out and start doing research and then to fake that research and deal with the blowback and deal with the, you know, the controversy and the risk. To do that would take a grand wizard of the KKK level racism. That would be a really deep dive. That would be sort of a sleeper cell thing to do. And there's it just strange credulity that any academic would, devote their life to the study of human intelligence and then intentionally fake the results. And so we have the research, and even as importantly, or more importantly, we don't have any research that refutes it, right? If there was somebody who could go out there and in a scientific manner show that there was no difference in IQ among races, that person would have a Nobel Prize waiting for them. In other words, there's such a disincentive for the finding that there's a difference among races and such an incentive for finding that there is no difference among races, that to only have hardcore statistical evidence for the former but have none for the latter, for me, pretty much closes, that debate. And so here's this thing, and this is me agreeing with Charlie Kirk to a degree, that yes, generally speaking, there is a significant difference among IQs among the races. A difference between an 85 IQ and a 100 IQ is something like the difference between a high school degree and a college degree. And if this is true, and I believe that it is, then we have to accept that. The next step then is having the heart and the character to go about working with that truth in a way that's helpful, in a way that's loving, in a way that can make things better. And at the same time, just wanting to be helpful and just wanting to be loving isn't sufficient enough to deny something that's not going to change and therefore not be able to help the very people that you say you want to help. So this is what I'm trying to do. Another, piece that I saw, he says that Islam is the sword with which the left is cutting its own throat. I agree with that, right? I agree with that because what it means for the vast majority of people to be Muslim is to put Islam way above, all of our philosophy, all of our political systems in the West. It's the willingness to kill somebody over wearing a T-shirt with the face of the prophet on it, right? This happened in Syria 2012. This was right before the Syrian civil war and the country fell apart. There was a Dutch cartoonist who made up some images of the prophet, put those on T-shirts, and Syrians in Syria firebombed the Dutch embassy. And then 2 years later, fled by the hundreds of thousands, by the millions, to places like Germany, to places like the Netherlands, to places like Sweden. And they take this ideology with them. Now, arguments can be made that, Islam is a religion of peace, right? Islam is a religion of tolerance. But the number of people who would interpret the Quran in such a way would shrink the number of true followers of Islam from 1.5 billion to, at best a few 100,000. So what I say when it comes to Islam is that I'm not intolerant of Islam. I don't care what you call God. I don't care how many times a day you pray, and I don't care what you eat. I even respect you for holding a prayer practice that requires you to pray 5 times a day at certain hours and holding to a certain diet. I'm not intolerant of Islam. I am, however, intolerant of Islam's intolerance. And so I listen to a lot of left-leaning podcasts, and on certain podcasts, they'll routinely throw out the word Islamophobia, right? That's Islamophobia. We have Mamdani, who's the likely next mayor of New York, and I am personally not happy about that. I don't know who Mamdani is. I haven't done that deep dive, but this idea that Democrats think the way forward for us as a party is to take socialism and Islam and put it together into one candidate. That's, again, I don't think we're putting together that Venn diagram quite the right way. So I don't care about Mamdani's religion if he's a progressive, if he's tolerant with that religion. But the problem is, just think about it. This is what I call derivables, things that everybody can derive just from common knowledge and common experience. How many Muslim explainers out there do you know? How many moderate Muslim movements do you know? How many Muslims who make the holy pilgrimage to Mecca every year, and there are millions, while they're there, advocate for gay rights, advocate for religious tolerance in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. There's not a single mosque, synagogue, church. I'm sorry, not a single mosque. There's not a single Buddhist temple, Hindu temple, synagogue, or church in the entire land. So again, agreeing with Charlie Kirk and trying to put together that perfect Venn diagram, my intolerance of Islam is not an intolerance of it per se, it's an intolerance of Islam's intolerance. So I just wanted to use that as a way to, kickstart this channel. We have to find ways to start blending these things. The shooter of Charlie Kirk, the alleged shooter of Charlie Kirk, I've been seeing, disturbing amount of conspiracy theories already around that. But let's just assume that Tyler Robinson killed Charlie Kirk. Tyler Robinson is trans, right? I get he's not personally trans, but when you're in a romantic relationship with a man who claims to be trans, you are in effect trans, like you are, participating in that phenomenon. And the shooter in Minnesota at the Catholic school, he was a man who identified as trans and apparently had a lot of conflict about that. Had felt, in his own words, that he had brainwashed himself and had been brainwashed. And part of what he did on that day was expression of that frustration and that confusion. And so the reason I'm bringing this up is because as a Democrat, I think we as Democrats are wrong on trans. And I think we have two examples here where people who claim trans simply could not be trusted. You can't trust a man that picks up a rifle and silences another citizen for free speech, such as Tyler Robinson did. And his boyfriend, his girlfriend, whatever you want to call it, is a furry, and they're sitting around spending all their hours online on Discord and Reddit and others. And so they're just deeply unserious people, right? And so this is an example. This is a data point. And this is, an example of people who say, no, I don't believe in trans. I don't personally believe in trans. It's all subjective. It's a person's subjectivity turned outwards and now forcing a general objectivity. And, somebody like me would be saying, no, why would I trust you? And here you have, a man who could not be trusted based on his own actions. Same for the shooter of the Catholic school in Minnesota. And so, what's necessary for a path forward is for all sides to turn within and to see, okay, where's the false circle in our Venn diagram? What is the thing that we're missing? And it's a very difficult thing to do because people don't want that perfect Venn diagram as much as they want their little circle or their little circles within it to be represented at the cost then of the overall truth, at the cost of the more subtle, the more refined, the more precise truth. So on the left, but no, I don't believe that trans is real. I think trans is a cult. I think trans is a mind virus. I think trans is a fad. I was listening to Adam Mockler, whose channel I really like, and he was talking in the wake of Charlie Kirk's assassination about his trans friends online. And the thought that came to me is like, at this point, saying you're talking to your trans friends online is no different to me than saying you're talking to your goth friends online. The only difference between the two being that goth clearly sees itself just as a lifestyle, just as a fashion choice, whereas trans is the same thing. It's just people identifying with a certain lifestyle, but with the incentive then that gives them this very passive aggressive power to define reality for others and to claim victimhood and then to claim a certain amount of political support and rights that goth doesn't have. And so as a Democrat, I think we need to pivot hard on trans and just say, of course, it's your right to express yourself in any way that you choose, but it's not your right then to force others to participate in that. And as a Democrat and as somebody who's looked deeply into the literature on race and IQ, and in another episode, I'll go more deeply into my own personal experience with IQ. I have a fairly rare learning disability. About 1 in 100 people have my IQ split. When you get an IQ test, you don't actually get one IQ score, you get two. You get a verbal IQ score and you get a nonverbal IQ score. And I have a very high verbal IQ, but I have a substandard nonverbal IQ. So personally, which is why this issue sticks out for me, I know from personal experience the limits that IQ will place upon you. I know what it's like to excel at reading and writing and understanding arguments and literature. And I know what it's like to be lost in, all but the most basic of math courses. And so if race and IQ is real and there's abundant evidence that it is, if we truly care about helping those populations, we have to accept that as fact. And the right has moved on. The right has, they're doing high fives and ringing bells and the whole thing when it comes to race and IQ because they know that the science is on their side on that. However, what I find all too lacking is the heart to say, okay, this is reality, but we need to be careful about how we hold that. We need to be careful about what that means. And we need to understand that just because it's true of the group doesn't mean it's true of individuals. Michelle Obama is very intelligent. Ketanji Brown Jackson did not become a Supreme Court justice just because she's black, right? That might have been the deciding factor. But to me, that's okay because the Supreme Court isn't just about performance. It isn't just about acumen. It is also about representation. It is also about reflecting the population. And furthermore, right, this is, you know, a, a place ripe for criticizing Charlie Kirk. If your argument is that Ketanji Brown Jackson isn't fit for her position because she's black and blacks are known to have a lower IQ. Well, and guess what? The only group that should comprise the Supreme Court are Jews because the same research that reveals that blacks have a on average lower IQ than whites reveals that the highest IQs are Jewish. So I'd turn that around to somebody like Charlie Kirk and say, by your own reasoning, then all the Supreme Court justices should be Jewish, right? Again, it's easy to call out the hard truth when it serves you. It is much harder to always call out the hard truth. So anyways, just episode one. If you feel like it, give me a like, comment, a subscribe.